This is the scene Washington never saw coming. A Canadian prime minister, the same man Trump keeps referring to as governor, stepping onto an aircraft, not headed to Washington, not to Mar-a-Lago, not to Bedminster. He's flying the other direction. Mumbai, New Delhi, Sydney, Canberra, Tokyo. 10 days, 3 continents, roughly 2 billion people. While Trump stood in front of Congress last Tuesday evening proclaiming victory in the trade war, while his lead negotiator sat in a Capitol Hill studio issuing ultimatums on live TV, at that very moment, Mark Carney was zipping up a suitcase. This isn't a courtesy visit. This isn't staged for cameras. This ranks as the most significant economic countermove any close American ally has mounted against Washington in decades. And almost no one in the U.S. press has joined the dots. That changes today. As of this morning, Wednesday, February 26, 2026, the framework of North American trade is being taken apart in real time, from opposite ends at once. From Washington comes a public ultimatum insisting on permanent tariffs, full access to Canadian dairy, and tougher rules of origin locked into whatever agreement comes next. From Ottawa comes a 10-day diplomatic sprint aimed at India, Australia, and Japan that is deliberately constructed to render Washington's ultimatum toothless. Both actions unfolded inside the same 48-hour period. Let's be clear, what is unfolding is not simply a trade disagreement. It is the controlled dismantling of 32 years of tightly integrated continental commerce. And the wrecking crew is working from both sides. Start with what Jamieson Greer actually stated, because the details are far more explosive than the headlines suggest. Greer is the United States trade representative, the person who will sit opposite Canada in the most important trade talks since NAFTA was signed in 1994. Hours after Trump's State of the Union speech, Greer stared straight into a CBC News lens and delivered this. If Canada wants a fresh trade agreement, it must accept permanent tariffs. Not short-term, not emergency, permanent, written directly into the text of the deal. Let that sink in. The end of tariff-free trade between the United States and Canada. 32 years of zero-duty commerce across the planet's busiest commercial frontier. $2.7 billion crossing every single day. And the chief U.S. negotiator just declared that renewal comes at the cost of capitulation. Greer went further. He spelled out precise demands: open dairy markets, restore American wine and spirits to Canadian shelves, reopen government procurement to U.S. firms, all while Washington keeps a protective tariff barrier on Canadian products embedded inside the renewed pact. Then came the line that should have set off alarms in boardrooms from Detroit to Dallas. Rushing didn't happen fast enough. U.S. content didn't happen fast enough. We need stricter rules. Strip away the trade speak, and the meaning is plain. The deal Trump himself signed in 2018, the USMCA, the agreement his own team negotiated, the framework he personally called a historic triumph, failed. The fix isn't repair. The fix is to scrap the core principle of zero tariffs that has shaped continental trade since 1994 and install a permanent toll booth instead. That isn't bargaining. That's a landlord jacking up rent overnight with no warning and no contract. Timing matters enormously here. Greer issued that ultimatum Tuesday night, 5 days after the U.S. Supreme Court invalidated Trump's main tariff authority as unlawful. 5 days after the courts told the White House its emergency economic powers had been misused. The backup tariff tool, Section 122 authority, is already on borrowed time. It expires late July. Without congressional approval, it vanishes. Democrats have openly vowed to block any extension. Here's the piece mainstream coverage overlooked. Days earlier, Trump posted on Truth Social that the replacement tariff would climb to 15%. The announcement happened. The post went live. The executive order was never executed. The paperwork was never submitted. The threat floats on social media. The enforceable mechanism does not exist on paper. And the week that replacement authority lapses, late July, is the exact week the USMCA review formally begins. the week Canada and the United States were already scheduled to renegotiate the entire structure. That is the leverage Washington believes it carries into those talks. Pause. It isn't what they imagine. Now the part almost no one is covering. Greer's pointed warning about so-called screwdriver operations, countries such as Vietnam or China shipping goods to Canada for token processing before sending them duty-free into the United States, was not a casual aside. It was a deliberate signal. What he outlined is the rationale for rewriting USMCA rules of origin so severely that Canada shifts from being a gateway to becoming a choke point. Let's get precise, because this is where the genuine risk hides. Under existing USMCA rules, goods produced in Canada with substantial Canadian content cross into the U.S. tariff-free. That is the backbone of integrated North American supply chains. Auto parts, agriculture, energy, they move freely because the rules permit it. What Washington now wants is to demand sufficient American content inside those same goods before they qualify for zero tariffs, even in a renewed deal. Every supply chain touching Canadian territory would face inspection not only for Canadian content, but for American content. The consequence is intentional and severe. Canada already maintains a trade agreement with the European Union. Canada belongs to the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. Canada has standing arrangements with Japan, South Korea, and 11 other countries. Under the origin rules Washington seeks, none of those partnerships could be used to funnel goods through Canada into the American market. Every global trade link Canada possesses would turn into a liability inside the bilateral relationship. That is the snare. Washington is attempting to erect a wall not merely around its own market, but around Canada's access to everyone else's market at the same time. And Carney has just walked straight past it. Front one, India. Thursday morning, Carney touches down in Mumbai, then heads to New Delhi. Current bilateral trade between Canada and India sits at $30.8 billion per year. Carney's declared objective, formalized at the G20, is to more than double that to $70 billion by 2030 via a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. The bitter irony already being debated by Indian trade observers. India signed a framework deal with Trump only 2 weeks before the Supreme Court ruling. New Delhi lowered tariffs and committed to $500 billion in purchases. 14 days later, the legal tool that extracted those concessions was struck down by American courts. Carney lands in New Delhi carrying an unspoken message: patience outlasts panic. A deal with Canada offers something Trump can no longer guarantee any trading partner anywhere: confidence that what is agreed today will still stand next month. The concrete topics include energy collaboration, uranium supply chains, and artificial intelligence cooperation. But the strategic aim is singular. A comprehensive economic partnership agreement with India carves out a tariff preferential route for Canadian goods into a 1.4 billion person market that demands zero American content and zero American sign-off. That is a direct structural workaround to every rules of origin restriction Washington is pushing. Front 2, Australia. This stop merits far more scrutiny than it has received. 81% of Australians currently oppose Trump's tariff approach. That figure comes from national polls, not official statements. Australia's Prime Minister faced a television camera and, responding to Carney's description of a post-American trading system, said 3 words: "I agree with him." Carney will address both houses of Australia's parliament in a joint session, the first Canadian Prime Minister to do so in almost 20 years. In Australia's system, a joint parliamentary address is one of the highest honors a foreign leader can receive. It signals deep strategic alignment. Whatever Carney delivers from that lectern will echo in every capital that trades with both the United States and anyone else. Here is where it darkens for Washington. Australia dominates critical minerals, rare earths, lithium, the essential inputs for every semiconductor, every missile guidance system, every electric vehicle battery manufactured anywhere. These are not replaceable farm goods. These are strategic bottlenecks for the technologies that will shape the next half-century of economic and military rivalry. Last fall, on the sidelines of the G20, Canada, India, and Australia quietly signed a trilateral technology and innovation partnership focused on critical and emerging technologies, plus supply chain diversification beyond the American orbit. American media barely noticed. Carney is now about to turbocharge that three-nation arrangement with summit-level meetings in all three capitals during one 10-day journey. Front three, Japan, then Tokyo, $36.4 billion in yearly bilateral trade, the cornerstone of the entire Indo-Pacific security structure. Every agreement signed in Tokyo reinforces a framework that does not need American scaffolding to hold. Clean energy, advanced manufacturing, critical minerals, food security. Each deal pulls another strand from the post-1945 assumption that the only market worth pursuing is the American one. Here's who is paying close attention and what they see. American auto workers watch Trump's trade representative openly cheer the shuttering of a Jeep plant in Brampton, Ontario, a city of 700,000, as evidence the plan is succeeding. Two-way auto trade between the United States and Canada surpasses $100 billion annually. That flow moves both ways. The country just ordered to swallow permanent tariffs now has 91% of its population demanding reduced reliance on the United States. American farmers watch 40 agricultural groups pool money this week to launch a campaign backing trade agreement renewal. They understand precisely what Greer's permanent tariff demand signifies. If Canada accepts permanent tariffs on its exports, it will mirror them on imports. American corn, soybeans, pork, dairy, all of it gets repriced in a market that takes roughly 1/3 of U.S. agricultural exports. And Carney is preparing to spend 4 days in India exploring agricultural partnerships that could redirect Canadian food exports into a market 7 times larger than Canada's home consumption. American defense contractors watch the Canadian defense minister board the same aircraft. Defense cooperation sits on the agenda in New Delhi, Canberra, and Tokyo, 3 of the biggest defense spenders in the Indo-Pacific. Carney has already shifted 70% of Canadian military procurement away from American suppliers and locked Canada into the European Union's defense procurement framework. Every new defense tie formed on this trip is revenue that will never show up on a Lockheed Martin earnings report. International capitals see something simpler. America's top trade negotiator publicly declared the era of free trade with its closest ally is finished. That closest ally responded by boarding a plane headed the opposite direction. That message needs no interpreter. People close to the White House say the atmosphere inside is growing increasingly tense. Trump spent 108 minutes addressing Congress, insisting tariffs are succeeding. America is prevailing. The world is complying. He said it 5 days after the Supreme Court ruled his primary tool unlawful. He said it while the replacement authority counts down to expiration. He said it while the executive order he announced online was never formalized. This does not look like leverage. When CBC asked Greer when he anticipates a deal with Canada, his reply was 2 words: "We'll see." That is not the response of someone holding strong cards. That is the response of someone who publicly demanded permanent tariffs from a country whose prime minister is currently scheduling meetings across 4 continents with leaders who command 2 billion consumers and the raw materials every major technology America will rely on for the next 50 years will require. Meanwhile, Canadian markets are sending a signal Washington appears unwilling to register. The TSX Composite Index reached 34,000 for the first time ever. Bank of Montreal exceeded quarterly profit forecasts. National Bank of Canada reported better than expected results. While American markets fell 500 points in one session on a Trump social media post last Friday, Canadian markets have been steadily rising. That gap is not random. It is the market betting on 2 separate futures. Here is the domino chain already moving, and why Washington cannot halt it. Canadian companies have already replaced nearly $11 billion of the $18.5 billion in American export revenue they lost by pivoting to 27 other trading partners. That figure comes from Globe and Mail reporting based on actual trade statistics, not government spin. Businesses are not waiting for the USMCA review. They are already constructing the alternative. If Carney formally signs a comprehensive economic partnership agreement in New Delhi this week, Canada will have secured strategic trade relationships with the first, second, third, and fifth largest economies on Earth, China, the European Union, India, and Japan, in less than 12 months. That is not diversification. That is a new gravitational center. If the Australian parliamentary address yields joint declarations on critical minerals or defense cooperation that pointedly omit American involvement, the message becomes impossible for Washington to dismiss. And when Carney enters the USMCA review talks in late July, he will arrive carrying partnerships representing more than half of global GDP. The person opposite him will hold a demand for permanent tariffs and a legal instrument that expires the same month. You cannot credibly threaten to destroy someone's only crossing when they have been building ferries for a year. So what comes next? Here is where paths split. Scenario 1. Washington retreats. Greer's permanent tariff position was an aggressive opening bid. If the economic signals keep diverging, Canadian markets climbing, American farm exporters hurting, Republican senators from agricultural states will start breaking ranks. 40 farm organizations are already playing that hand. A deal gets reached closer to 2018 terms with superficial changes. Both sides claim success. The trade war fades quietly. Scenario 2. Carney's sprint exceeds expectations. The India SEPA launches formally. Australia issues joint critical mineral statements. Tokyo produces clean energy and defense cooperation agreements. By the time the USMCA review begins, Canada's structural dependence on the American market has shrunk. Washington's leverage weakens with every signature. The permanent tariff demand becomes unenforceable against a country with real alternatives. Scenario 3. Mutual miscalculation. Washington dismisses Carney's travel as optics and presses the permanent tariff demand into formal talks. Canada counters with reciprocal tariffs on American agriculture and consumer goods. American farmers take the hit. American auto supply chains fracture. Both economies shrink at once. The relationship constructed over 32 years takes a decade to restore. The clock that matters right now is this. Greer said face-to-face talks with Canada will start in a couple of weeks. By then, Carney will have returned from New Delhi, Canberra, and Tokyo. The meetings will have occurred. The agreements will have been signed. Or not. The messages will have been delivered. Watch what Carney signs in India. Watch what he says from Australia's parliamentary floor. Watch the USMCA timeline. Those 3 markers will reveal which scenario is active. Subscribe to this channel right now and enable notifications because over the next 10 days, 3 events are colliding in the same time frame. Missing anyone means missing the complete story. The India Summit, the Australian parliamentary address, the start of USMCA pre-negotiations, all overlapping, all linked. We will track every development as it unfolds. If the CPA launches formally in New Delhi, we will explain exactly what it means for the USMCA talks in real time. If Carney's Australian speech generates joint critical mineral statements, we will map the specific supply chains that shift overnight. This channel will connect the dots before mainstream outlets realize they are even related. Here is the last thing you need to grasp. Trump stood before Congress and proclaimed America is winning. 12 hours later, his trade representative told the world the price of friendship with America's closest ally is now permanent submission. 24 hours after that, a former central banker from Ottawa boarded a plane to demonstrate that friendship was never the sole option. The toll booth stands empty because the traffic already discovered another route.